Tonight, we go into a place buried so deep in the woods that even maps refuse to remember it. A house that has been burned down 3 times, yet never stays dead. And by the end of this story, you'll understand why. Ethan and Max weren't afraid of ghost stories. They were thrill seekers, always chasing the next adrenaline rush. But there was one thing that genuinely scared them: losing their family cabin. It was the one place their grandfather had warned them, with a chilling seriousness in his eyes, never to enter. After he passed away, the deed fell to them. They decided to drive up, inspect the property, and maybe finally rebuild the old ruin. They knew the stories, of course. The cabin had supposedly burned to the ground in a fire back in 1978, but when they finally pushed through the overgrown trail and reached the clearing, their hearts stopped. The cabin was standing, perfectly, impossibly intact. It wasn't a ruin. It wasn't even new. It looked old, weathered, but whole. Max was the first to speak, his voice a strained whisper. This shouldn't exist. Ethan tried to force a laugh, slapping his brother on the back. Grandpa must have been pulling our leg all these years, but inside, a cold dread was blooming in his stomach. He knew something was terribly wrong. As they got closer, the wrongness became more apparent. The front door looked swollen, almost bloated, as if it had absorbed something from the inside. It bulged outward, the wood warped and damp. Hesitantly, Max reached out and touched the door's surface. The moment his fingers made contact, the wood seemed to exhale. A slow, wet breath of stale air pushed against his hand. He recoiled, but their curiosity was now a ravenous beast. They had to know what was inside. Pushing the heavy door open, they stepped into the gloom. The air was thick with the smell of dust, mildew, and something else, something faintly metallic, like old blood. Wallpaper peeled from the walls in long, sun-bleached strips. The lamps were coated in a thick layer of rust, their glass clouded with grime. But what truly terrified them weren't the signs of decay. It was the scratches. Deep, violent claw marks gouged into every single surface. The walls, the floors, the ceiling, all of it was covered in these frantic, desperate marks. Ethan touched one of the gouges in the wooden wall. The wood was warm. Not just warm, but pulsing with a faint, almost imperceptible heat, as if whatever made those marks wasn't finished. On a rickety wooden table in the center of the room, they found an old cassette recorder. A small handwritten label was taped to its side. In shaky, faded ink, it read, "Do not listen." Of course, that was an invitation they couldn't refuse. Ethan pressed the play button. A hiss of static filled the room, followed by a man's trembling voice, cracking with fear. "If you're hearing this," the voice whispered, "it means the house. It rebuilt itself again. It wants bodies. It needs them. I've tried everything. Fire, burns never work. It grows back. Whatever you do, do not go into the basement. Do not." The man's warning was cut short by a blood-curdling scream, a sound of pure agony that made Ethan and Max jump. The scream was followed by a sickening crunch, and then silence on the tape. But the silence in the room was immediately broken. A loud bang echoed from the far end of the cabin. It came from the basement door. Bang, a second time louder, more forceful. Bang. The third impact was a sharp crack, and the heavy padlock on the door didn't just break, it snapped from the inside, the metal pieces flying across the room. Slowly, with a groan of protesting hinges, the basement door creaked open. A foul, rotting stench poured out, a smell of decay so potent it made them gag. And then they saw it. A thick, dark liquid began to drip down the top step. Blood. Before they could even process the horror and run, the entire house groaned, a deep, guttural sound like a beast stirring from a long slumber. The front door they'd entered through slammed shut with the force of a cannon blast. The windows, once clouded with grime, now sealed over with a black, tar-like substance, plunging them into near-total darkness. The walls around them seemed to shift and groan, the wooden beams contracting like muscles. The house was awake. Panic set in. They were trapped. Suddenly, footsteps creaked on the floorboards above them, but neither of them was moving. They were frozen in place, listening. From the direction of the kitchen, a new sound began. A dragging noise, slow, wet, deliberate. It was getting closer. A figure emerged from the hallway's shadows, its form a grotesque parody of a human. It was tall, impossibly so and twisted, its limbs bent at unnatural angles. Its skin was charred black, as if it had been horribly burned. Its eye sockets were empty, hollow voids that wet the thick, black fluid down its scarred cheeks. It opened its mouth, and a sound erupted that was not one voice, but a chorus of dozens, the agonized screams of every soul that had ever died within these walls. The brothers finally broke their paralysis and ran, scrambling up the stairs in a desperate flight for their lives. They found a bedroom and threw themselves inside, barricading the door with a heavy wooden dresser. As they huddled in the darkness, the walls of the room began to pulse with a faint rhythmic light, like veins under skin. Horrifying images started to form on the wallpaper, flickering ghostly memories. They saw the cabin burning in 1951, consumed by roaring flames. They saw it again in 1978, the night their grandfather always talked about. And they saw it one last time in 1995, reduced to ash. Each time it was utterly destroyed. And each time it rebuilt itself. In that moment, the terrifying truth slammed into them. The house wasn't haunted. The house was the monster. Without warning, the floor beneath Ethan's feet split open with a sound of splintering wood. Black, root-like tendrils shot out from the darkness below, wrapping around his legs and torso. He screamed Max's name as he was dragged down into the abyss, his voice echoing until it was abruptly cut off. Max, driven by a surge of desperate love, chased after the screams. He smashed through a door that hadn't been there moments before, finding himself in a vast, cavernous space that shouldn't exist within the cabin's small frame. In the center of the chamber was a colossal beating heart. It was a grotesque fusion of wood, rot, and human remains. Bodies were fused into its pulsating mass, their eyes blinking in silent, eternal horror, their mouths open in screams that made no sound. And he saw Ethan. He was still alive, being slowly, inexorably pulled toward the ghastly organ. Max charged forward, screaming his brother's name, but the burned creature dropped from the ceiling, landing in front of him. It pinned him to the ground with impossible strength. Hundreds of voices whispered from its mouth, a unified, hungry chorus. The house must feed. The last thing Max heard was Ethan's final soul-tearing scream as the monstrous heart swallowed him whole, pulling him into its fleshy wooden core. 3 days later, the local authorities finally found the cabin, guided by the brothers' abandoned car. It stood in the clearing, looking perfectly intact, old but untouched. They found no sign of a struggle, no sign of Ethan, no sign of Max. But as one of the officers ran his hand along the interior wall, he noticed something strange. 2 fresh handprints pressed deep into the wood. They were still warm. The house had grown again. And it was hungry. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next descent into the dark. Stay safe out there.